Hello and welcome. My name is Corin Thald, and I am Mercodia's Medical Science Liaison. I'll be the host of today's webinar, and I'm glad that you all could join us. At the end of the presentation, I will read any submitted questions, and then our speaker will have a chance to answer them. Our speaker today is Dr. Ralph DeFronzo. He is Professor of Medicine and Chief of the Diabetes Division at the University of Texas Health Science Center and the Deputy Director of the Texas Diabetes Institute in San Antonio, Texas. Using the euglycemic insulin clamp technique in combination with radioisotope turnover methodology, limb catheterization, indirect calorimetry, and muscle biopsy, he has helped to define the biochemical and molecular disturbances responsible for insulin-resistant type 2 diabetes. He has received a number of prestigious awards, such as the ADA's Lilly Award and the Novartis Award for Outstanding Clinical Investigation Worldwide. In addition, he has received the ADA's Banting Award and the EASD's Claude Bernard Award, which are the highest scientific achievement awards given by these prominent associations. Dr. DeFronzo is a distinguished clinician, teacher, and investigator, and we are happy to have him with us today. So without further ado, Dr. DeFronzo.
Thank you very much for that very kind invitation, and I'd like to welcome all of our listeners. Today I'm going to review some new concepts about the role of the kidney in the maintenance of glucose homeostasis and the implications of some of the derangements that occur in people with type 2 diabetes for the treatment of this very common metabolic disorder. So let's get started. And if I can make this slide go. Okay, there we go. So these are my disclosures in terms of conflict of interest. I have grant support from Bristol Myers Squibb, AstraZeneca, Janssen, in particular, companies that are involved with some of the newer medications that we will be talking about. And I'm a member of the Speakers Bureau for both AstraZeneca and Novo, and I participate on a number of advisory boards as shown here on this slide. We have come to learn now that the kidney plays a very, very important role in the maintenance of normal glucose homeostasis, and I've summarized what we have learned in the last decade about the important contribution of the kidney to the maintenance of normal glucose homeostasis. First, we know that the kidney is responsible for the production of about 20% of glucose that occurs throughout the sleeping hours, and this production of glucose comes primarily through the gluconeogenesis pathway. The kidney itself contains very, very little glycogen. We also know that the kidney utilizes glucose as an energy source, and if one were to put a catheter in the renal artery and the renal vein, we would see that the net balance across the kidney is zero, indicating that the amount of glucose which is taken up and utilized by the kidney is precisely equal to the amount of glucose which is produced by the kidney. We also know that the kidney filters about 180 grams of glucose every day, and all of this glucose in normal glucose-tolerant individuals is reabsorbed. There are two transporters, the SGLT2 transporter, which is the high-capacity transporter, takes back some 80 to 90% of the glucose, and if it does its job, then the SGLT1 transporter, which is the low-capacity, high-affinity transporter, takes back the remaining 10 to 20% of the glucose, and we'll talk about the role of these transporters in more detail. S stands for sodium, GL for glucose, T for transporter, abbreviated therefore SGLT2 and SGLT1 transporter. Now, following an overnight fast, normal individuals produce glucose from endogenous sources at the rate of about 1.8 milligram per kilogram body weight per minute. This is critically important since throughout the sleeping hours, there is no exogenous input of glucose into the body, And the brain has an obligate need for glucose. It cannot utilize any other metabolic fuel. Therefore, it's critically important throughout the sleeping hours that organs within the body produce glucose to maintain our blood sugar in the range of 80 to 90 milligrams per deciliter. Prior to the last decade, we used to believe that all of endogenous glucose production came from the liver, but we now know that, in fact, that the kidney as well as the liver contribute to endogenous glucose production, with about 15 to 20% of glucose production throughout the sleeping hours coming from the kidney, and the other 80 to 85% coming from the liver. Now, let's look at the two major hormones, namely insulin and glucagon, which are responsible for the regulation of endogenous glucose production, both at the level of the liver as well as the level of the kidney. Now, using treated glucose, one can very precisely quantitate the rate of glucose production, and that is shown here to be about 12 micromoles per kilogram body weight per minute during the fasting state following an overnight fast. And you do not have to be concerned about the units. What I'd like you to do is just to look what happens when we start a physiologic infusion of insulin to raise the plasma insulin concentration to approximately what you'd see after a typical mixed meal. You see that at time 0, the basal rate of endogenous glucose production is very quickly and nicely suppressed by this physiological increase in insulin. So what we now would like to know is what is the effect. Now, the other hormone that regulates endogenous glucose production is glucagon. And this now shows you, following an overnight fast, shown here by during the minus 60 to 0 time period, the rate of endogenous glucose production and the effect of a physiologic increase in the plasma glucagon concentration on endogenous glucose production. You can see that very quickly that there's an increase in glucose influx into the body. And as we see here now on the bottom two slides, that there is a very, very different response at the level of the kidney as opposed to the level of the liver. So all of the increase in endogenous glucose production in response to glucagon is coming from the liver, and the kidney itself actually has no effective response to glucagon. Now, I want you to keep this in mind, because when we come back and talk about the SGLT2 inhibitors, you're going to see that this differential response in glucagon plays a very, very important role in terms of the efficacy of this new class of drugs, the SGLT2 inhibitors. So let's now look at the role of the kidney in people with type 2 diabetes. What I've summarized for you here are the rates of total renal and hepatic glucose production in non-diabetic individuals from the two previous slides. And what I'm going to show you now in the right-hand panel is what happens in people with type 2 diabetes. So throughout the sleeping hours, there's a significant increase in the amount of glucose that's produced by all tissues in the body in people with type 2 diabetes. And it's this increase in endogenous glucose production which is responsible for the increase in fasting glucose concentration in our diabetic patients. Now, you can also see that both the kidney, the middle panel, as well as the liver, contribute to this increase in endogenous glucose production. But from the standpoint of the contribution of the kidney versus the liver, you can see that in diabetics, the kidney contributes a disproportionate amount to this increase in endogenous glucose production. Now, it also should be noted that the fasting insulin concentration in people with type 2 diabetes is usually elevated 2 to 3-fold compared to that in non-diabetic individuals. So what this means then is that both the kidney and the liver are severely resistant to the ability of insulin to suppress glucose production through the gluconeogenic pathway in both the kidney and the liver. And this overproduction of glucose because of the insulin resistance in these two organs is, of course, the factor that's responsible for the increase in fasting glucose concentration. So if you were to extrapolate this increase in endogenous glucose production, both primarily from the kidney, you would see that the kidney adds an extra 50 grams of glucose every day to the systemic glucose pool, assuming that the diabetic patient has a hemoglobin A1C of about 8% and a mean plasma glucose of 160, which is not too uncommon for most of the diabetic patients that we see in general practice. Now, the other important role of the kidney has to do with its ability to reabsorb glucose. So in you or I, with a glomerular filtration rate of 180 liters per day and a mean day-long glucose of 100 milligram per deciliter, we filter about 180 grams of glucose, and this is all reabsorbed. Now, of course, the diabetic, and again, this refers to someone with a mean glucose of about 160 milligram per deciliter, the diabetic filters an excess amount of glucose in the range of about 250 grams per day, and unfortunately, all of that glucose is reabsorbed. So the kidney actually, and the diabetic patient, has been malprogrammed so that when it sees an increase in the filtered load of glucose, it actually responds by increasing all of that excess glucose which has been filtered, and the net result is returning this glucose to the systemic circulation. Of course, what we would like to have happen is for the kidney to dump all of that excess glucose that's filtered in the diabetic patient, and this would have a very salutary effect in improving the level of glycemic control. And we're going to talk about glucose reabsorption by the kidney in great detail because we now have a new class of drugs, the SGLT2 inhibitors, which can correct this very important pathophysiologic abnormality. So let's take a review at how the kidney handles glucose. As I said earlier, the normal glomerular filtration rate is about 180 liters per day. The fasting glucose is about 90 milligram per deciliter. And so we filter about 160 grams of glucose every day. And as you can see in the bottom right, none of this glucose is excreted in the urine. So how does the kidney reabsorb the glucose? In the early part, the S1 segment of the proximal tubule, the SGLT2 transporter, which is the high-capacity, low-affinity transporter, takes back 90% of the filtered glucose. Lower down in the proximal tubule in the S3 segment, the SGLT1 transporter, which is the low-capacity, high-affinity transporter, will take back the remaining 10% of the glucose, assuming that the SGLT2 transporter does its job. And the net result is that there's no glucose that appears in the urine. So how does this SGLT2 transporter work? So what I've shown for you here is a typical proximal tubule cell. The tubular lumen is to the left, and the capillary blood side is to the right. The active transport step actually is on the contraluminal side, on the blood side, and it's the sodium-potassium ATPase pump. So this pump removes sodium from the cell in exchange for potassium. When you remove sodium from the cell, the intracellular sodium concentration declines, and this favors now the transport of sodium from the lumen into the proximal tubule cell. But that transport of sodium, as you can see to the left, is a co-transport with glucose. So as sodium moves into the cell, it brings glucose with it. This increases the glucose concentration within the proximal tubule cell, and then the glucose moves from the cell into the bloodstream through the GLUT2 transporter, which is a facilitator transporter. So the active step is actually the sodium-potassium ATPase pump, which takes place on the capillary or blood side, allowing sodium and glucose to passively move the kidney, handles glucose. I'm going to take you back to your medical student days and review for you a normal renal glucose titration curve. So on this slide, you can see plotted on the x-axis the plasma glucose concentration, and what we'll plot on the y-axis is the rate first of glucose excretion, and then second, the rate of glucose reabsorption. So we're going to insert a catheter into a vein, and we're going to progressively infuse glucose to raise the plasma glucose concentration from a fasting level of about 90 to 100 milligram per deciliter to over 300 milligram per deciliter. Well, you can see that as we raise the plasma glucose concentration from 100 to 150 to 180 to 200, no glucose appears in the urine. But when we reach a plasma glucose concentration of 200, we've now exceeded the renal threshold for glucose reabsorption, and all of the glucose that's filtered above this plasma glucose concentration is then excreted in the urine. If we now plot the renal glucose reabsorption curve, you can see that it's the mirror image, inverse mirror image of the excretion curve. So as we raise the plasma glucose concentration from 100 to 200 milligram per deciliter, all of the filtered glucose is reabsorbed. However, when we reach a plasma glucose concentration of 200 milligram per deciliter, we've now reached the maximum reabsorptive capacity of the kidney to reabsorb glucose, as indicated in the top of that orange line by the TM for glucose, or maximum transport for glucose. And as we further increase the glucose concentration above 200 milligram per deciliter, all of the glucose that's filtered in excess of this appears in the urine. Now, in real life, there's not a sharp break in the threshold at which we spill glucose in the urine. We start to spill glucose at a plasma glucose concentration of approximately 180 milligram per deciliter, and we continue to spill glucose until the plasma glucose is in excess of 200 milligram per deciliter, as shown here by the rounded blue curves. Now, we now know from studies that have been carried out in animal models of both type 1 and type 2 diabetes that the maximum renal tubular reabsorptive capacity for glucose is increased. And in fact, we actually have data dating back to 1951, Dr. Farber's study in type 2 diabetics, in 1971, Dr. Mogensen's study in type 1 diabetics, which demonstrated that the maximum reabsorptive capacity for glucose was increased in both of these diabetic conditions. Unfortunately, these two studies have been sort of largely lost in the literature, and only recently have sort of gotten the attention that they should have gotten. So if we were to now look at renal glucose handling in people with type 2 diabetes, you see that as we raise the plasma glucose concentration from 100 to 200, you don't see glucose start to spill in the urine as we see in normal glucose-tolerant individuals. As shown by the pink curve, glucose does not start to appear in the urine until the plasma glucose concentration exceeds approximately 220 milligram per deciliter, at which point then, of course, we've now exceeded the maximum reabsorptive capacity of the kidney in the diabetic. And you can see in the top part of this slide in green that the TM for glucose is markedly increased in people with type 2 diabetes. So, of course, in a certain way, this is paradoxical, because what we would really like in the diabetic, as the blood sugar level increases, we'd like the kidney to dump this excess filtered glucose into the urine. But unfortunately, the kidney has been malprogrammed, and when it sees an increase in the filtered load of glucose and more glucose appearing in the kidney, a signal goes to the kidney to increase its reabsorption of glucose. And of course, this works against the diabetic and of course the physician in our ability to achieve the level of glycemic control that we would like in our people with type 2 diabetics. Now, we've also come to learn a lot about the molecular mechanisms by which there's this increase in reabsorptive capacity in the kidney, based on a study that I've shown here by Dr. Ramon. So what Dr. Ramon did was to culture from the urine of control subjects shown in yellow and diabetics in orange, the proximal tubule cells, and he measured the messenger RNA for SGLT2, the first set of bars, and then the SGLT protein, the middle set of bars. And you can see that both transcription and translation of this important SGLT protein is increased. He also then went on to look at the activity of the SGLT2 transporter. Using alpha-aminoglycoside, which is an inert sugar, as you can see in the third panel to the right, the activity of glucose transport by the SGLT2 transporter is increased. So there are two molecular problems in the people with type 2 diabetes. Number one, they have an increase in the number of these SGLT2 transporters in the proximal tubule of the kidney, and the avidity of these transporters for glucose is also markedly increased. And we have come to learn that hyperglycemia actually stimulates the production of the SGLT2 protein by turning on the gene that's responsible for the production of this SGLT2 transporter. So how do the SGLT2 inhibitors induce glucoseuria? So this is a study that we recently carried out. It was published in Diabetes in 2013. This study contained 12 people with normal glucose tolerance and 12 people with type 2 diabetes. And they're very well matched for age, BMI. And what I really want you to note here in this slide, though, is the hemoglobin A1C in the people with type 2 diabetics, which was 6.5%. So we would consider, I think most of us would consider anyway, a hemoglobin A1C of 6.5% to be, represent really quite good control in our type 2 diabetic patients. But what I'm going to show you is that all of these physiologic abnormalities that we've been talking about in terms of increased reabsorption of glucose in people with type 2 diabetes are already well established in people who have just this minimal elevation in the hemoglobin A1C. The study design is shown in the lower part. The people were admitted to the clinical research center on the day prior to study, and their anti-diabetic medications were held. We then infused a low dose of insulin to lower the fasting glucose concentration to approximately 100 milligram per deciliter. Now, at this point, what we're going to do is to progressively increase the plasma glucose concentration every 30 minutes by increments of 50 milligram per deciliter. Now, as we raise the plasma glucose concentration, this would lead to an increase in insulin, and we know that insulin does have an effect on renal glucose reabsorption. So we're going to carry out a pancreatic clamp in which we're going to infuse somatostatin, which will block insulin and glucagon secretion, and we're going to give back basal levels of insulin and glucagon, and so we'll now be able to increase the glucose concentration without changing the fasting levels of insulin or glucagon. And then we're going to bring the patients, we're going to treat them for 7 days with dapagliflozin at a dose of 10 milligrams per day. And after 7 days of treatment with dapagliflozin, we're going to bring them back and redo the pancreatic clamp. Now, this slide shows you the actual data in normal glucose tolerant subjects at baseline prior to any administration of dapagliflozin. And you can see that as we progressively increased the plasma glucose concentration from 100 up to 600 milligram per deciliter, we increase the amount of glucose which is filtered. We know this because we're measuring the glomerular filtration rate, and we know the plasma glucose concentration, and the product of the two gives us the amount of glucose which is filtered by the kidney. We're also collecting every 30 minutes the urine and measuring how much glucose is excreted, and the difference between what's excreted and what is filtered is the amount which is reabsorbed. And you see this a very similar curve that I showed you earlier. So as we raise the plasma glucose concentration from 100 to approximately 180 to 200 milligram per deciliter, as shown in blue, there's an increase in the rate of glucose reabsorption. But then we reach a plateau, and we can quantitate the maximum renal tubular glucose reabsorptive rate in these normal glucose tolerant individuals, and it's about 317 milligrams per minute. And we can also define the threshold at which glucose appears in the urine. And the threshold in normal glucose tolerant individuals is, in this study, on mean 182 milligram per deciliter. Now, on the next two slides, I'm going to show you in a bar graph presentation what happens to the maximum reabsorptive capacity and the threshold for glucose in people with type 2 diabetes compared to the normal glucose tolerant individuals. So the NGT individuals are shown in yellow, and their maximum reabsorptive capacity is 317 milligrams per deciliter a minute, as I showed you in the previous slide. Now you can see in these diabetic individuals who have a hemoglobin A1C that's only 6.5%, that their maximum reabsorptive capacity is increased by 25 to 30% to 420 milligrams per deciliter. Now, when we bring these people back and we treat them with dapagliflozin, you can see that both in the type 2 diabetics, the orange bar to the left, and in the normal glucose tolerant individuals, the yellow bar to the right, that we markedly reduce the maximum reabsorptive capacity of the kidney. Now, what about the threshold at which glucose spills into the urine? Remember, in normal glucose tolerant individuals, that threshold was 182 milligrams per deciliter, shown in yellow to the right. And in the diabetic, the threshold at which glucose spills into the urine is significantly increased. It's 206. So it's increased by 24 milligrams per deciliter in these diabetics who really have a hemoglobin A1C that most of us would be quite happy with, 6.5%. Now, what happens when we treat these individuals with dapagliflozin? You can see that we lower the threshold at which glucose spills into the urine to less than 40 milligrams per deciliter in both groups. So the major mechanism by which dapagliflozin and all of the SGLT2 inhibitors work is by lowering the threshold at which glucose spills into the urine. They also lower the maximum reabsorptive capacity, but the key take-home message here is that we're lowering the threshold at which glucose spills into the urine. And in fact, this explains why, if I give dapagliflozin or empagliflozin or canagliflozin, the three FDA-approved SGLT2 inhibitors, with an individual who has perfectly normal glucose tolerance and a normal fasting glucose, that even though the fasting glucose is 80 milligrams per deciliter, they're going to dump some 60, 70, 80 grams of glucose in the urine because I've lowered their threshold to well below their fasting glucose concentration. And now this is shown schematically here. So if we look at that typical glucose titration curve, as we raise the glucose concentration from 100 to 180, in normal glucose tolerant individuals, urinary glucose excretion does not appear until we get to about 180 milligrams per deciliter, as I showed you earlier. In the diabetics, you see you have to raise the glucose to a much higher level before the glucose starts to spill in the urine. And if we now look at the diabetics who are treated with dapagliflozin, as shown here by the blue dot and blue line, these individuals start to spill glucose when their blood sugar is 40 milligram per deciliter. What this means then is that as long as the diabetic has normal renal function or near normal renal function, 100% of the people with type 2 diabetes are going to respond to the SGLT2 inhibitor. This is the only class of drugs in which you can anticipate a 100% response in terms of an increase in urinary glucose excretion and a reduction in the plasma glucose concentration. Now, one other point that I want to make is that the threshold for spilling glucose into the urine in diabetic will vary depending upon the mean glucose concentration that is present in the diabetic patient. So in the individuals in the study that I told you about, with a mean hemoglobin A1C of 6.5, the threshold was increased to about 206 milligram per deciliter. If your A1C is 8, the threshold at which glucose spills into the urine is about 220 milligram per deciliter for glucose. And in an individual who had a hemoglobin A1C 9 or above, the threshold at which glucose spills into the urine would be a plasma glucose concentration in excess of 240 milligram per deciliter. So the worse the glucose control, as indicated by the hemoglobin A1C, the higher is the threshold at which glucose spills into the urine. But nonetheless, no matter how high the threshold is in the diabetic, as long as they have normal or near normal renal function, you will see a marked increase in urinary glucose excretion when you treat them with an SGLT2 inhibitor. Now, in the late 1980s, we carried out a series of studies to examine what the effect of inducing glucosuria would be on the core molecular biochemical defects that are present in people with type 2 diabetes. So these were actually studies that were carried out in diabetic rodents, and to inhibit glucose transport, we used fluorescein, which is a molecule that comes from the bark of the apple trees when they're blossoming in the spring. Now, fluorescein is a nonspecific SGLT2, SGLT1 inhibitor. But in these diabetic rodents, when we treated them with fluorescein, we almost completely normalized the fasting as well as the postprandial glucose levels. When we blocked glucose reabsorption in the kidney and led to an increase in urinary glucose excretion. And then we went on using the euglycemic insulin plants to show that when we reduced the plasma glucose concentration, we markedly improved insulin sensitivity in muscle. And there were a number of reasons at the molecular level that we saw this improvement in insulin sensitivity in muscle. First, there was a major improvement in the insulin signaling transduction system. Once you activate the insulin signaling system, that leads to an increase in GLUT4 translocation from the intracellular to the cellular domain, and we saw an improvement in GLUT4 translocation and glucose transport, as well as an improvement in a number of other abnormalities, including defects in glycogen synthase and pyruvate dehydrogenase, following the induction of normal or near normal glycemia. And this relates to the concept of glucotoxicity. We showed many, many years ago that chronically elevated glucose levels cause severe insulin resistance in muscle, and we now showed with the use of fluorescein, at least in these rodent studies, that if you would lower the glucose by increasing urinary glucose excretion, you could improve insulin sensitivity in muscle. We also know that the diabetic liver overproduces glucose throughout the sleeping hours, and the reason for this is because there's an increase in glucose-6-phosphatase, which is the rate-limiting enzyme which gets glucose out of the liver. Now, when we treated diabetic animals with fluorescein and normalized the glucose, what we showed was a major improvement in insulin sensitivity in the liver, which was related to a reduction in the activity of glucose-6-phosphatase. Now, all of this increase in hepatic glucose production comes from the gluconeogenic pathway in diabetics, and when we treated the animals with fluorescein, we observed a marked decrease in the rate-limiting enzyme for gluconeogenesis, which is PEP, phosphoenolpyrrate carboxykinase. And then we know that individuals with type 2 diabetes have a severe defect in the ability to secrete insulin. And when we lowered the glucose with fluorescein in these diabetic animal models, we show a marked improvement in beta cell function. So by utilizing a molecule, fluorescein, that worked on the kidney to increase glucose excretion, and I might point out that fluorescein as well as the SGLT2 transporters have no effects other than the lower to the blood glucose by this effect on the kidney. By lowering the glucose, we are correcting the insulin resistance in muscle, we're correcting the insulin resistance in liver, and we're correcting the defect at the level of the beta cell. And these are three of the major core defects that are present in type 2 diabetic individuals. So what we wanted to know were the data that we generated with fluorescein in rodents applicable to humans. And I'm going to show you a study that was just recently published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation using dapagliflozin. So the patient population is shown here. You can see that the individuals, 12 of them who were treated with dapagliflozin, were well matched to the individuals who were treated with placebo. This was a 2-to-1 randomization. These individuals, typically they're type 2 or overweight. BMI is about 34. Hemoglobin A1C in this study was about 8.7. Now, the study design is shown here. We measured their insulin sensitivity using the euglycemic insulin clamp. For those of you who are not familiar with this technique, it's a technique that we developed many years ago. We're going to infuse insulin to raise the plasma insulin concentration to an improvement in beta cell function. Now, we were surprised by a finding which I'm going to display for you on the next slide. Now, one of the things that we knew was that when you treat someone with one of these SGLT2 inhibitors, there's a marked increase in urinary glucose excretion, but the blood sugar level never fell as much as we anticipated it falling. So this now slide shows for you the plasma glucose concentration in the diabetic patients who received dapagliflozin in orange and placebo in yellow. So these individuals are fasted at 8 p.m. On the night prior to the study, and then at 8 a.m. in the morning, we start a tritiated glucose infusion because we want to measure endogenous glucose production. So you can see here now, from the period of time from about 8 a.m. in the morning to 12 noon, the time representing here from 0 to 240 minutes, there's a decline in the plasma glucose concentration in both the placebo and dapagliflozin treated groups, but the decline is really quite similar. And the reason that the plasma glucose declines is that with prolonged fasting, we're depleting liver glycogen stores, and because of this, there's a decrease in glucose production from the liver. Now, to the right, I'm going to display for you the rate of endogenous glucose production. So you can see that in the group treated with placebo in yellow, that there's a progressive decline in endogenous glucose production from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, or in this slide is shown over the 240 minutes that we're measuring endogenous glucose production. Now, in marked contrast to what happened with the placebo ingestion, about 30 minutes after the ingestion of dapagliflozin, there is a quite pronounced stimulation of endogenous glucose production, as shown here in orange. One would anticipate that if you look at the plasma glucose concentration, that the decline in plasma glucose concentration would be much greater and much steeper in the people treated with dapagliflozin, because in addition to depleting liver glycogen, we are increasing urinary glucose excretion. And we now know why the glucose concentration didn't decline more than it should have, and that's because there's this paradoxical stimulation of endogenous glucose production, and this increase in endogenous glucose production is blunting by about 50% the increase in urinary glucose excretion, and therefore blunting the decline in plasma glucose concentration. So what is it that's responsible for this increase in endogenous glucose production? So on this slide, I've just, to the left, reproduced for you the changes in endogenous glucose production from the previous slide, and now I've plotted for you the plasma glucagon concentration. So as you'd expect in the placebo-treated group with prolonged fasting, the glucagon concentration declines a little bit. And in marked contrast, in the people treated with dapagliflozin, there's a marked stimulation of plasma glucagon. Now, if you think back to the earlier part of this presentation, I told you to remember that glucagon had no effect on the kidney to increase renal glucose production. So we believe that this increase in glucagon in the dapagliflozin-treated group is working on the liver to increase endogenous glucose production, and this increase in endogenous glucose production is blunting the decline in plasma glucose concentration. Now, the second part of the story has to do with the plasma insulin level. So this slide, to the right, I've reproduced for you from the previous slide the change in plasma glucagon, the paradoxical rise. Now, to the left, I've now shown you the insulin concentration in the two groups. And you can see that the insulin concentration falls very similarly. But in fact, one would anticipate that if there's an increase in endogenous glucose production, and this blocks the decline in glucose, and in fact the glucose starts to rise, there should be an increase in the plasma insulin concentration. And to the contrary, the opposite occurs. The plasma insulin concentration continues to fall during the 4 hours following dapagliflozin administration. So there are two very paradoxical effects that occur on these two key hormones that are involved in the regulation of glucose homeostasis. Following dapagliflozin, plasma glucagon is turned on and plasma insulin is inhibited. Now, the net result of this is going to be an increase in endogenous glucose production, and we believe, as I mentioned earlier, that this increase is coming from the liver. So we believe that we can markedly enhance the efficacy of the SGLT2 inhibitors by combining them with a medication that inhibits glucagon and stimulates insulin. And the most potent way to do this would be to give a GLP-1 receptor agonist. A DPP-4 inhibitor might also work, but I suspect that it will not be nearly as effective as the GLP-1 receptor agonist would be. Now, how long does this paradoxical effect of dapagliflozin on endogenous glucose production persist? Well, the first part of the slide shows you the measurement of endogenous glucose production on the 2 days leading up to the day on which we administered the study drug. So you've already seen these data. The placebo is shown in yellow, and on the day in which we administered the study drug in placebo, endogenous glucose production falls quite nicely. In orange, you see the paradoxical increase in endogenous glucose production that occurs following dapagliflozin. Now, we repeated these studies at day 3 and at day 14, and you can see that this paradoxical increase in endogenous glucose production, which we believe is coming from the liver, persists for upwards of 14 days. Now, we don't know whether this excess production of glucose by the liver will continue, and we don't know for how long it will continue. And these are studies which are now ongoing, but we believe that this effect persists for a long period of time, and therefore we're very interested in seeing if we can block this turning on of the liver by giving a concomitant medication such as a GLP-1 receptor agonist or a DPP-4 inhibitor drug. So in summary, to this point in man, it's very clear that the kidney plays a critical role in the maintenance of normal glucose homeostasis. It produces glucose, as we discussed, primarily through the gluconeogenic pathway. It also takes up and metabolizes glucose as an energy source, and it reabsorbs all of the filtered glucose. In people with normal glucose tolerance, the SGLT2 transporter is the high-capacity transporter that takes back some 80 to 90% of the filtered glucose, while the SGLT1 transporter takes back the remaining 10 to 20% of the filtered glucose. The net result being all of the glucose that's filtered is reabsorbed in normal glucose-tolerant individuals. In type 2 diabetics, however, renal glucose production is increased and contributes in a major way to the increase in fasting glucose concentration, and then there's a completely separate defect related to the renal threshold and the maximum reabsorptive capacity. Both the threshold for spilling glucose into the urine and the maximum reabsorptive capacity for glucose are markedly increased in the diabetic, and this, of course, is going to contribute to the maintenance of hyperglycemia. We also know that dapagliflozin, and this is also true of the other two SGLT2 inhibitors, empagliflozin and canagliflozin, reduce the maximum reabsorptive capacity, but most importantly, these SGLT2 inhibitors reduce the threshold for glucose spillage into the urine to less than 40 milligrams per deciliter, and this explains why virtually everybody with normal or near normal renal function will respond to this drug. Now, clinical studies with the SGLT2 inhibitors. Where do these drugs fit in the treatment algorithm? Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are three drugs that are approved by the Food and Drug Administration. One is dapagliflozin, the second is canagliflozin, the third is empagliflozin. Now, rather than showing you data from all three of these molecules, I'm going to show you the highlights of studies with dapagliflozin, but I assure you that the data with canagliflozin and empagliflozin are very, very similar to what I'm going to show you with dapagliflozin. So this is a study that was carried out by Professor Farinini, and I first want you to focus on the left-hand panel. So these are 274 drug-naive type 2 diabetic patients who have suboptimal glycemic control as defined by a hemoglobin A1C of 7 to 10%. And what we're going to plot for you is the dose-response effect of dapagliflozin, 2.5 milligrams, 5 and 10 milligrams, on the decrement in A1C compared to placebo shown in yellow. And you can see that the 10 milligram dose of dapagliflozin reduces the A1C by about 0.9%. Let me point out to you that the 2.5 milligram dose of dapagliflozin is not approved for use in the United States. And if you read the package insert, it's recommended that you start with the 5 milligram dose, and that if you need additional A1C reduction, you can then go to the 10 milligram dose. What I want to emphasize to you on this slide, however, is these two bars in yellow to the right. So in this study, there were a number of people who were screened who had a hemoglobin A1C that was above 10. And it was felt that it was unethical, of course, to do a double-blind, placebo-controlled study in this group. So this group of individuals all were assigned to treatment with dapagliflozin, either 5 or 10 milligram per day. And you can see that the reductions in A1C were 2.9 or 2.7 respectively. So that means that if you have an individual with a hemoglobin A1C of 10, you put them on this drug, dapagliflozin, and there are very similar data with canagliflozin and empagliflozin, you would drop the hemoglobin A1C from 10 to about 7.2. What that means then is that if you were to combine the SGLT2 inhibitor with any other oral agent or with a GLP-1 receptor agonist, these patients would achieve a hemoglobin A1C that's less than 7 and probably close to 6.5%. So with just 2 drugs, you could get people who really are severely hyperglycemic pretty well controlled. So I think that this observation is worthy of a dedicated follow-up study when we look at people who are very, very poorly controlled to see if, in fact, we can get them under good control with an SGLT2 inhibitor with one other oral hypoglycemic agent. Remember, these people who are in such poor control, we would normally treat them with intensive insulin therapy, get them very well controlled, and then after 2 or 3 months, switch them over to whatever oral agent therapy you think is the optimal therapy. This observation of the powerful effect of the SGLT2 inhibitor on this group of poorly controlled individuals offers a potential alternative approach to intensive insulin therapy. Now, this is a slide that summarizes a study carried out by Dr. Cliff Bailey from England looking at the effect of addition of dapagliflozin to metformin-treated diabetic patients. So remember, metformin is a drug of choice that's recommended by all diabetes organizations. And you can see that as you go from 2.5 to 5 to 10 milligrams, with the maximum dose of dapagliflozin, you reduce the hemoglobin A1C by about 0.85, very similar to what we saw in drug-naive patients. Now remember that we're going to increase urinary glucose excretion to the extent of about 70 or 80 grams per day, and each gram of glucose is equivalent to about 4 calories. So not surprisingly, in this study, at the end of 6 months, there was a loss of body weight, which was about 3 kilograms. Now, we know that most of this weight loss occurs in the first 3 months, a little more during the next 3 months, and then after 6 months, the weight loss plateaus, even though these individuals are excreting some 70 or 80 grams of glucose in the urine. So if you're excreting 80 grams of glucose in the urine, 4 calories per gram, that's 320 calories over, say, 16 days, you'll lose 1 pound. Over a month, you lose 2 pounds. So you would expect that these people would continue to lose weight after 6 months because they're continuing to excrete glucose in the urine. And in fact, they don't. The weight loss plateaus. Now, interestingly, they don't lose weight, but they don't regain weight for upwards of 2 years. So what this says to me is that there must be some adaptation that occurs within the appetite regulation centers in the hypothalamus that causes these people to continue to take in excess number of calories and combat the reduction in body weight. Now, remember that the sodium glucose is co-transported in the kidney, so when we block glucose reabsorption, we're also blocking sodium reabsorption. And in the first 2 or 3 days of treatment of diabetic individuals, they go into negative sodium balance in the amount of about 150 milliequivalents of sodium, 1 liter of water. Hematocrit rises about 1 to 1.5%. But this mild reduction in the intravascular volume, you can see here, leads to about a 4 to 5 millimeter reduction in systolic and 1 to 2 millimeter reduction in diastolic blood pressure. Now, because these drugs, the SGLT2 inhibitors, work on the kidney, it really doesn't make any difference how insulin resistant you are or how much beta cell dysfunction there is. The drug is going to be very effective. So this is a review by Dr. Zhang of studies in individuals who have type 2 diabetes who are newly diagnosed within 1 year and who have had their in yellow and who've had their diabetes for in excess of 10 years in orange. you can see that dapagliflozin here at 10 milligrams caused a reduction in the A1C, which is very similar in people with new onset diabetes and people with long-standing diabetes who are clearly severely insulin resistant and have very little beta cell reserve. And they also looked at a higher dose of dapagliflozin, 20 milligram per deciliter, 20 milligram per day. And you can see that, in fact, that the people with long-standing diabetes respond again as well as those with new onset diabetes. So this is a drug that can be used very early and very late in the natural history of type 2 diabetes. Now, we also know that the SGLT2 inhibitors can be added to type 2 diabetic patients who are inadequately controlled on insulin with or without oral anti-diabetic agents. So in this study by Dr. John Wilding, you can see in people who are treated with diet plus placebo, there's a modest reduction in A1C, but in the group treated with dapagliflozin, 10 milligram per day, the A1C declines by about 1%, and in fact, this effect persists for upwards of 2 years. Now, not shown in this slide, the people who are treated with placebo gain a significant amount of weight, while the people treated with dapagliflozin lose a significant amount of weight. And despite the improvement in the A1C, there's no increase in the incidence of hypoglycemia compared to the placebo group. In fact, there's a decrease in the incidence of hypoglycemia compared to the dapagliflozin to the placebo group. So, in summary, starting in the upper left, the SGLT2 inhibitors satisfy a number of unmet needs in the treatment of our diabetic patients. They correct a novel pathophysiologic defect at the level of the kidney, the increase at which glucose spills into the urine. And upper right, by promoting urinary glucose excretion and also reversing glucotoxicity, we see a very nice reduction in the A1C. To the left, because you spill calories in the urine, they lose weight, and because you block sodium reabsorption in the kidney, there's a reduction in blood pressure. On the bottom, hypoglycemia is distinctly uncommon with the use of these drugs. And then to the right, we can use these drugs virtually with all other agents as well as monotherapy. So this is my last slide. We know that the drug works well as monotherapy. It can be added on to people who are failing on metformin, or failing on SU or pioglitazone, or any combination of these drugs. It can be used in combination with a DPP-4 inhibitor or a DPP-4 inhibitor plus metformin. It can be added on to insulin in people who have type 2 diabetes, and these are all approved uses of the drug by the Food and Drug Administration. Now, as add-on therapy to insulin in type 1 diabetics, this is something that is of great interest. There are preliminary studies that are now starting to appear that it is effective in such individuals, but of course there is no current approval by the Food and Drug Administration for the use of a DPP-4 inhibitor in people with type 1 diabetes. We also have the potential to explore the use of the SGLT2 inhibitor in pre-diabetic individuals, meaning individuals with IGT or IFG, impaired fasting glucose. Now, we've generated data that glucotoxicity is very important for the beta cell dysfunction in these pre-diabetic individuals, and my anticipation is that that SGLT inhibitors would actually be very effective in preventing prediabetes from progressing to diabetes. But at present, of course, no such studies have been carried out, and there is no indication by the Food and Drug Administration to use these drugs in the treatment of people with prediabetes. As I showed you earlier, I think that these drugs may have a unique role in treating people who are markedly hyperglycemic with A1Cs greater than 10%, and they, I think, can be used to quite great advantage in combination with GLP-1 analogs because the GLP-1 analog would be expected to block the glucagon increase and suppress hepatic glucose production, and also stimulate insulin and offset the progressive rise in insulin. Now, I'm going to end with one slide here to review the safety of the SGLT2 inhibitors. The major side effect that has been seen in clinical trials is an increase in genital infections in women, vulvovaginal mycotic infections in women, and also mycotic infection in men who have not been circumcised. Although there is a statement in the package insert that there may be an increase in urinary tract infection with the use of these SGLT2 inhibitors, if you look carefully at the data with all three of the SGLT2 inhibitors, it's difficult to demonstrate, in fact, in these studies, an increase in urinary tract infection. Because the drugs will cause mild intravascular volume depletion, you should be careful to look for orthostatic changes in blood pressure in patients who are concomitantly being treated with a loop diuretic, or in the elderly people who may have sort of pipe stem type vessels and may have some orthostatic drop in blood pressure when they stand up. Changes in plasma electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and calcium really have not been observed. There has been concern that the increase in glucose excretion in the urine could cause damage to the kidney, but in fact, we know that these drugs now for upwards of 2 years have very little effect on the eGFR, and when changes have been observed, they've been in the order of 3 or 4 ml per minute decreases, which return to normal following cessation of the drug. We also know that there's a genetic disorder called familial renal glucosuria, and these people lead normal lives. Interestingly, they don't have an increase in UTIs or genital infections. They do not have polyuria, polydipsia. Some of them have had renal biopsies. They have perfectly normal kidneys. And when you look at their serum creatinine levels in GFR, there's no decline with age. Nocturia can be seen in maybe 1 to 2% of people during the first several days of initiating therapy, but thereafter is not a problem. Drug-drug interactions really are really quite minimal. And the key thing that you need to remember is that the effectiveness of these SGLT2 inhibitors is reduced in type 2 diabetics with reduced renal function. So in people with an eGFR less than 60 ml per minute, the efficacy of the SGLT2 inhibitors is reduced, and in individuals with an eGFR of less than 45 ml per minute, these drugs are not recommended because they really only reduce the A1C by the order of 0.2 to 0.3%. So this is the last slide that I was going to show in my presentation today. I know that you have been writing in with questions, so we'll now try to address some of the questions that you have submitted for review.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So as Dr. DeFronzo mentioned, we do have some questions submitted by our audience, and I'll start with the first one here. When do you anticipate we would hear results from using SGLT2 in type 1 diabetes?
So that's a good question. These studies are currently ongoing. We've already seen preliminary data with several of the SGLT2 inhibitors in abstract form. They do look to be effective. So I would anticipate, since these studies are going on now by all of the companies, that they will be completed within, say, 9 to 12 months. Usually takes about 1 to 2 months to put together the portfolio to be submitted to the FDA. And then depends on whether the FDA will give this a rapid review in 3 months or a more extended review upwards of 9 months. So I would say, depending upon the FDA response, anywhere between 1.5 years to 2 years to see formal approval in patients with type 1 diabetes. We'd like to see it sooner, but we need to make sure that the results are going to show efficacy, that there will not be excess hypoglycemia, and that there will be no adverse side effects that are unique to the type 1 diabetic population.
Okay. Does SGLT1 increase in reabsorptive capacity when SGLT2 is inhibited?
Yeah, so I actually had those slides. This is a very astute question at the end of my presentation, but to sort of stay within the time limits, I didn't show them. What we know is that when you give an SGLT2 inhibitor, you completely block the SGLT2 transporter. So if we filter 180 grams of glucose per day, and 90% of that glucose is being reabsorbed by the SGLT2 transporter, and I completely block that, we should see 150 to 160 grams of glucose excreted in the urine. We never see that. What we see is maybe 80 grams of glucose being excreted in the urine. So you never see more than 50% of the filtered glucose load appearing in the urine. And we now know from actually studies that we reviewed in the diabetes care article, in a diabetes article in 2013, that the SGLT1 transporter can reabsorb a lot more glucose than our current understanding. Now, because the SGLT2 transporter takes back 90% of the glucose, the only thing the SGLT1 transporter has to do is take back the remaining 10%. But that doesn't mean that that's the maximum capacity of the SGLT1 transporter. In fact, we now know from data analysis that we've carried out, as well as now from hard data in animal studies, that the SGLT1 transporter can take back as much as 30 to 40% of the filtered glucose load. So when I instantaneously block SGLT2, SGLT1 can very quickly, literally within seconds, now increase its reabsorption of glucose. We don't have to have new gene transcription or translation. We're now sending more glucose to the SGLT1 transporter, and it will then instantaneously start to reabsorb this glucose that's being presented to it. And this upregulation, if you want to look at it that way, of SGLT1 offsets to a significant amount the blockage of glucose reabsorption by the SGLT2 transporter. So that was a little long-winded, but I hope it was clear. And what it says to me is that we should be thinking about developing drugs that block both SGLT2 and SGLT1. But remember that SGLT1 is the transporter in the gut that's responsible for glucose reabsorption. So you can't completely block SGLT1 because then you'll get osmotic diarrhea, and that'll be a problem for the patient. But we still can block SGLT1 in the gut to a significant extent without causing GI symptoms, and you would expect to get a significant reduction in the A1C because of decreased glucose reabsorption in the gut. And based on calculations that we've done, we believe that if you block SGLT1 in the kidney, you can enhance glucose excretion by an additional 80%.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question, it looks like, and that is, what is the impact of SGLT2 in the glucagon secretion at the level of the alpha cell in the pancreas through the SGLT2 receptor in the alpha cell?
Yep. Another good question. So this year at the American Diabetes Association, there was an abstract that was presented by the group from France, Bart Stahl's group, in which they demonstrated that there are SGLT2 receptors on the alpha cell. So they took cultured alpha cells from both rodents as well as humans, and then they treated these in culture, these alpha cells with an SGLT2 inhibitor, and showed when you inhibit the SGLT2 transporter in the alpha cells that there's an increase in glucagon. Now, that can in part explain the increase in glucagon that we saw in humans, but I'm quite certain that that's not the entire story. because there are no SGLT2 transporters on the beta cells, and we know that there's a clear reduction in insulin rather than the increase that should occur when the blood sugar starts to go up with this turning on of endogenous glucose production. And what that says to me is that it's very likely that the increase in glucose excretion in the urine and the kidney sends a neural impulse up to the central nervous system, to the hindbrain or to the hypothalamus, and then back to both the alpha cell as well as the beta cell to augment glucagon and inhibit insulin secretion. So I think that while there is a direct effect on the alpha cell, I think the stimulation of glucagon is much more complex and involves neural reflexes that remain yet to be defined.
Okay, we have received one more question, and that is, does the subjects, healthy or those with type 2 diabetes, potassium level impact the hyperglycemic clamp process in any way? Would subjects, healthy or diabetic, undergoing this hyperglycemic clamp process need potassium supplementation, and why?
Yeah. So if you're doing a routine euglycemic insulin clamp, where you're raising the insulin to physiologic levels, there is a small, about 0.4 to 0.5 decrease in the plasma potassium concentration. So we don't, during a euglycemic insulin clamp, normally replace potassium. However, when you're doing a hyperglycemic clamp and you're doing the stepped hyperglycemic clamp and you're raising the glucose concentration to measure the threshold and the maximum reabsorptive capacity from 100 to 600, if you're not doing the pancreatic clamp and you're letting insulin be secreted, there is a marked increase in insulin secretion, and you can actually drop the serum potassium by 1 to 1.5 milliequivalents per liter. So when we're doing a stepped hyperglycemic clamp without somatostatin to block insulin secretion, we do give a small amount of potassium, and we give it orally prior to starting the study. If you're doing the hyperglycemic clamp, but you're doing it with somatostatin and replacing only basal insulin, then you don't need to replace, you don't need to give any potassium supplementation under those circumstances.
Okay. Another question from the audience. The glucagon antibody or glucagon receptor antagonist are known to increase the glucagon levels. Are you concerned of the combination with the SGLT2 potentiating the glucagon levels? Are you concerned on potential alpha cell hyperplasia with the combination?
Yeah. Well, of course, the glucagon receptor agonists are currently in development and have not been approved yet for clinical use. So if they are approved, and as this individual has asked this question, they do increase glucagon levels, and since the SGLT2 inhibitors also increase glucagon levels, one could argue that this might not be a combination that you want to use. But of course, this is something that would have to be looked at in detail, and particularly since we know that there may be a potential problem. But we first need to get the glucagon receptor antagonist approved before we would start to delve into such a study.
All right. Well, this concludes today's webinar. I'd like to thank you all for joining us and give a special thank you to Dr. DeFronzo for an excellent and insightful presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. I can tell you the questions obviously were people who understand this very well. And if those of you who asked those questions, if I didn't answer them clearly enough or you would like to discuss them with me in more detail, I can give you my phone number if you want to jot it down. You can give me a call here. And my phone number in the office is 210-567-6691. And if the line is busy, if you just leave your phone number, I will call you back and try to answer any unresolved questions.
Thank you again.